Hi, my name is Bill McCamley. I am a recovering politician who spent 20 plus years in and out of elected and appointed office in my home state of New Mexico. And welcome to What the Bleep Does That Mean? This is a podcast where we try to take a fairly complicated bit of things going on in the public right now and explain it in language most people can understand in 15 minutes or less. And today we're going to start talking about democracy. I know this is a small thing to start with. But in the last election in 2024, the words democracy and fascism came up a lot as the candidates and people in general talked about who they wanted to vote for. And one poll by Gallup actually showed that the issue of democracy in America was the second highest in importance, only behind the economy in terms of issues for voters. But the idea of democracy was never really defined. It means different things to different people right now. And it's important for all of us to understand what this means and why it is important for us to keep democracy going, especially under some of the new things that are going on right now. First, why is America considered a democracy? About 250 years ago, the US declared independence from England. People were super pissed off and fought a pretty bloody war over it for 8 years to get their own country. Why? The biggest reason was taxes. The folks on our side of the Atlantic had no say in how high these were. England had fought a really expensive war about 20 years beforehand, and the English in England didn't want to pay for it. So the king made a bunch of taxes up on the people living here in what became the United States, starting with a tax on molasses, which is basically sugar, then a tax on a whole ton of goods that they imported from England called the Stamp Act. And the final straw was a tax on tea, which was the only way back then really to get caffeine before coffee became a thing. So you can imagine how much that pissed people off. These taxes were really bad for regular working folks. And they were so angry about it, they organized a rebellion with the term no taxation without representation, which means what? They wanted to tell the King of England, hey, dude, if we don't have a say in how much money you're making us pay for stuff, then we're going to make our own country where we make that decision for ourselves. And that became the United States. And it's also the very basic concept of democracy. People should have some kind of voice in the decisions that affect them. See, at the time, England was ruled by this king. And for 1,000 years across Europe, most countries had one, and sometimes a queen, and used the term divine right of kings to justify their power. And basically, what they said was, God put me here, so you have to do what I say. Even though, for the most part, the reason most of them were there was because a great grandfather or someone killed a bunch of people with swords that didn't like them, and they just took power. In the US, we wanted to try something different. And it is based on this thing we call the social contract. And all it means is that rather than saying, God put me here so I can do what I want, leaders are elected by the people in their country. And they then have a responsibility to make decisions like how much to tax or what rules we all live by in those people's best interest, not just whatever's best for the leader. And the idea caught on. A lot of other colonies that were used to be under European powers in Africa and South America, they tried to put democratic forms of government in place. And a lot of times they used us as kind of an example. And they're all different, but it all has the same general idea. You get to choose who makes the decisions that affect you. And here's the really important part. If you don't like what they're doing, you can kick their asses out in the next election and try something different. So why is having this kind of form of government actually good for you in reasons that affect your day-to-day lives, rather than the one dude has all the guns and he will just put you in jail or kill you if you don't do what he wants approach? Number one, lower inflation. So as many of you probably know, inflation means how much prices on stuff goes up over time. And it's a pretty hot topic right now because a lot of people said during the last election, they voted for who they voted for because they were more worried about rising costs on things like eggs and rent than money money in their pockets than things like abortion or healthcare. And while having a democracy doesn't eliminate prices going up, there's a lot of people that have done a lot of work showing that strong democracies around the world are actually tied with having less of this inflation than other countries with kings or dictators. So if you're worried about those prices, making sure we have a good democracy is super important. The next is actually a better economy overall. A system where we can vote leaders in and out results generally in better schools and less violence, a place where smart people don't want to leave, and a more fair and stable system. And guess what? This is all super great for businesses because when a business person can hire a trained worker and don't have to worry about insane amounts of crime all the time, they can make more money. There is this African country called Zaire, and in 1965, there was this dictator dude named Mobutu, which took control, and he never left for 30 years. During that time, the people in Zaire went from being some of the most well-off in Africa to some of the poorest. And while he and his buddies got rich, buying castles and shit all across Europe, things sucked for everyone else because, hey, if you just do what you want and shoot anyone who opposes you, there isn't any reason to build more schools or roads or other things that make life better for regular people. The third reason you should think about in terms of why democracy is good is in democracies, generally, you can do what you want. Yeah, there are rules like speed limits and don't murder that neighbor with the annoying dog next door that barks all night. Because we live around other people and we got to have some basic rules. But within reason, you can read and watch what you want. You can hang out with who you like and you can say what you need to say. In countries with a dictator or a king, not so much. They don't let you do things because they need that control over your lives to stay in power. So some examples, if you want to watch porn in China, go to jail. It's illegal. In Russia, if you talk about how nice it is to not have kids on social media, guess what? Get fined $4,000. You want to wear jeans in North Korea? Get fined or publicly shamed, or also, yes, possibly go to jail. And no, I'm not kidding. So having a better economy and the ability to do things like talk about your life online or wear jeans, those are good things. But here is the thing about democracy. If we want those, we have to do some stuff, or as my father would like to say, take responsibility for your actions for it to work. We have to constantly fight for it. And if you're in a country with a dictator king or religious zealot dude in charge, it's simple. If you don't wear the jeans or look at porn or criticize the leader, you're fine. But then you don't get all the other good stuff like low prices and the ability to wear Levi's. So if these things are important to you, here are some things over the next year, 2, 4 years you may want to look out for. First of all, watch out for a president that wants to stay in office for too long. Here in the US, we have a thing called term limits. A president can only be there for 8 years, and that's on purpose. Think about it like a basketball shot clock, right? So back in the day, a team could just pass the ball around forever if they had the lead, and you would force the other team to foul you just to get it back. It sucked. Games were super slow. It was low scoring, and fans fucking hated it. So the rules got changed. So you had to take your shot with the ball or turn the ball over if you didn't do that in a certain amount of time. Term limits are similar, right? If the point of democracy is keeping the people in power rather than one guy, you set a limit to how long they can be there. And it's generally worked here. But getting rid of them is one of the big changes that dictators in China and Russia have done, so they don't have to leave until they die. So when you hear people claiming that a president should stay in power longer than 8 years, like this guy Steve Bannon just did a few weeks ago, tell them, nah, dude, let's keep what we got now. I like my Levi's. Next thing we need to watch out for is a thing called checks and balances. So what does this mean? When one dude has all the power, like Putin does in Russia right now, one of the ways they get there is by getting rid of anyone or any system that might get in their way, no matter the reason. Here in the US, where remember that the people who wrote our Constitution, our initial rules, wanted to do everything they could not to have another one of them kings, they set some stuff up. First, they created these different parts of the federal government. So yeah, the president has a bunch of power, but according to our laws, they can't make their own laws or spend money just by an order. And if a court says they're doing something wrong, they got to stop. Second, our system gives a ton of power to states and cities. The best example is schools. Traditionally, every state kind of does their own thing in terms of education, and it's worked because every state has different people in different situations, right? Third, they set up basic rights for everyone. And the first 5 of those in the Bill of Rights, which is kind of part of our laws, are pretty clear. You have the right to say what you want. The press has a right to publish things in a newspaper or on TV without the government telling them what to do. You can worship how you want or not at all. You can assemble in public places and you have the ability to ask the government for stuff. So the more a president says, I am going to do what I want with tax money without going through Congress, this literally happened last night, or, hey, state, if you don't do what I want, I'm going to make you, through money or force, do what I want. Again, kind of what happened last night. Or I'm shutting down that TV station or newspaper because they don't agree with me. The more those things happen, the more you know we're moving away from democracy to the bad shit, right? In America, as number three, and a lot of democracies around the world, there's a thing called a rule of law. And that's just a fancy way of saying this. Everyone living here is going to be treated the same under our rules. Pretty basic, right? But what to watch out for in sliding down that really crappy sewer to a dictatorship means that certain people who back the dictator are taken care of and others are punished. A great example of this is militias. In Italy during the 1920s, there were these groups called the Black Shirts. And in Germany in the 1930s, they were called the Brown Shirts. And I don't know why it's all about shirts, but it is what it is. These dudes weren't part of the government. They were just a bunch of thug gangs who supported Mussolini, the dictator in Italy, or Hitler, the dictator in Germany, by beating the shit out of people that opposed their dictator leaders. And they were never punished for this stuff because they were doing what the dictator wanted, and that was all that matters. So let's say here in this country, when a group of gangs starts going around threatening people in the name of a guy in charge, or worse, actually beating people up or killing other folks, and they aren't treated the same way that you and I would be, or they're pardoned after beating up cops, like what happened last week, this starts to become a problem. Look, democracies are not perfect. Hell, Winston Churchill, the guy who led England through World War II, once famously said, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others that have been tried. And let's be honest, we got some stuff we got to deal with here in the US. People are hurting, and there's a big gap between regular folks and those with a ton of money and power. Because of social media, a lot of us aren't talking with each other in real life as much as we used to. We got a lot of mass shootings going on. We got climate change. We've just got a lot of stuff to deal with. But the best way we can deal with this is together. And that means we should stick with this democracy bus we've all rode in on and not be fooled by a strongman. It'll leave us poorer with more wars and less freedom to do the things we like we're Levi's. I'd love to have a discussion about these issues with you, so please feel free to follow up with comments or questions on the social media sites. Thank you all so very, very much for listening and watching this, and good luck out there.